Who is willing to give that chair some friendship?
Who's what?
Is this
Who's willing to give that chair some friendship over there? That chair by that desk is lonely.
this feels like a trap. What do we have to do?
It's a trap.
Somebody said you never volunteer, and you never do because you're usually voluntold. So, Mr. Baker, would you go give that chair some friendship?
You have to be more specific.
Yeah.
There's three of us.
Yeah.
Mr. Daniel Baker.
I tried, Daniel, I tried.
And thank you very much. And while you're there, you can also, if you wouldn't mind, just clicking the arrow down. So you see how that works. You know, we won't tell people as we start. So anyway, just a little background on myself. David Moseley. Before I give too much of a biography, because throughout the presentation you're going to hear terms that some of you may or may not be familiar with. I just want to review a few things. In the Army, we have a rank structure. Everybody's aware of that. You have your officers, you have your non-commissioned officers. So you look at the top left here, E1 to E9. That's your enlisted people. That's people like me. I've never been commissioned by the United States government to be an officer. So currently I am in E6, right in the middle there. So when you hear E3, E4, E9, just know that if you're E9, you're as high as you're going to go on the enlisted side. You're not going to go any higher for your pay grade. Officer, same thing. If you're an O1, you're that butter bar lieutenant. And if you're an O10, that's the general of the Joint Chiefs of Staff there. You rarely will ever see the one on the far right, General of the Army. I think the last General of the Army, I think, was McCartney. And also down below, you have your warrant officers. The warrant officers are kind of a hybrid soldier. They were enlisted at one time. They became specific in a certain specialty, whereas a logistics officer encompasses all of logistics. Warrant officers are specific to a very specialty. So it would be a helicopter pilot, they could be a human resources technician, different things like that. So this gives you an idea of when I'm talking about the ranks and so on and so forth. Next slide. So our terms, definitions, want to make sure that we all understand what we're talking about here. A couple terms that you're going to hear throughout. There's going to be a lot more, but these are the two I got up there at the top. Vocation, ecumenicalism. Vocation, a person's employment or main occupation, especially regarded as particularly worthy and requiring great dedication. And then ecumenicalism, promoting or relating to unity among the world's Christian churches, although I would say in our modern era, ecumenicalism probably goes beyond that, unity among various world religions. And you hear the term MOS, military occupational specialty. That's a fancy way of saying that's my job. My job is 42 Alpha. That's my MOS, a human resources specialist. AIT, advanced individual training. That's what you go to after basic training to get your job if you're enlisted. NCOIC, non-commissioned officer in charge. So they're the one that's in charge of you. And OIC, officer in charge. So that's terms you'll hear throughout this presentation. I want to make sure that everybody understands what they are. So before I go any further, anybody here served in the military? Okay. I know we've all had family that has served in the military, so we can all relate to that. Going to the next slide. So I just want to give you a little bit of a background of myself, so you can say, well, this guy knows or he doesn't know what he's talking about. I was raised in Toma, Wisconsin, the Warrens area of Toma, Wisconsin. And yes, I was a twin, as you can see in the upper left-hand corner there. Although not Lutheran growing up, I was a very devout Christian household. We were homeschooled throughout, all the way from about 4 or 5, all the way to high school. In 2006, after graduating high school, I had always wanted to join the military, so I did. And in October of 2006, I went and joined the United States Army at Fort Jackson, South Carolina. The following year, in 2007, after completing training, I was stationed at Fort Eustis, Virginia. For you history buffs, Fort Eustis is in the Hampton Roads area of Virginia. which include Williamsburg, Yorktown, Newport News, Jamestown, Norfolk. In fact, on Fort Eustis itself, there's areas that Pocahontas and people like that would have lived. So just very rich with history. I enjoyed being stationed there. I left active component service in 2010 and joined the United States Army Reserve at Fort McCoy immediately upon leaving an active component. Currently, I serve as a military technician, which we refer to as dual status. Why is it dual status? Because I'm a civilian on the weekday, but I'm also a soldier. So I'm a staff sergeant at E6. If I were to leave that military position as an E6 and get out of the Army, I would lose my civilian job. So one is the civilian job is certainly contingent on the military job. We're probably going to have this little error message pop up throughout the presentation. Hopefully it doesn't distract too much. Been at Fort McCoy since 2010, served active duty there for a couple of years, came off the MOB, and then was in this MilTech position or military technician position. 2013, I had the blessing to marry my dear wife there, and then this last year, in 2015, we welcomed our first child, and I like to say that my wife and I are both from non-Lutheran background. She was Roman Catholic, I was Pentecostal charismatic, so we made the perfect Lutheran baby. That's what I like to say. So currently, my wife and Meredith and the baby Alida are up in Brookfield at Grandma's house, enjoying time with Grandma. So that's just a little bit of a background on myself. Next slide. So throughout this training, throughout this brief, I have to remember I'm not talking to soldiers or military personnel. Throughout this presentation, I'm going to take you through the different phases of military life that soldiers are going to experience, and the different challenges there that helps get us through those challenges. Yes, this is a presentation, but this is certainly going to be a discussion. So if you have questions, you stop and you ask me a question, and I will do my best to answer that question. If you have thoughts, please just state your thoughts. We can have a good, lively discussion. That's what this is about. So our first phase for military training is basic combat training. And the picture you see in the background is kind of tells it all. He doesn't look too happy. He looks kind of miserable. He's straining. He's dirty. That really sums up basic training pretty well. Basic training is a culture shock. And last night, some of us were talking about this during our downtime before Compton. And definitely a culture shock, not only physically and lifestyle-wise. Previously to basic training, I'm sure most of us don't awaken to people screaming at us in the morning, tearing our dressers and our lockers apart. Most of us don't do that. Most of us aren't on the go constantly, running here and there and shouting "kill, kill, kill" and screaming at other people and people screaming at us. So definitely a culture shock that way. Also a culture shock, and again, from my background here, culture shock morally. At basic training for the Christian, and actually before, I'm going to stop right here. Before I go any further, I say what it means to be a Christian. Hopefully I can answer that question throughout this. I may not answer it because I think for different people from different backgrounds, it can mean something different. So this is coming from David Moseley's perspective, what it means for me to be a Christian, specifically what it means for me to be a Lutheran in the military. You mean Christian, but then there's being Christian Lutheran in the military. It brings with it its own set of challenges. So anyway, continuing, going to basic training and dealing with that culture shock. You're also, part of that, what contributes to that, there's so many people from different backgrounds. My grandpa told me when I joined the military, he said, David, and he was back in the Army in the 50s, he said, there's a lot of different cats that you're going to see when you go to the military. And he certainly was right. There was people from all over the world that were there, all different world religions. There were certainly Christians at basic training. There was, I would say, a lot of nominal Christians at basic training. Nominal, can somebody tell me what nominal means? A name. Pretty much a name only. A lot of times, these Christians, they would go with you to a chapel service. But why do they go with you to a chapel service, you think, on Sunday morning? Somebody give me an idea why they might go. Well, food. At my chapel service, there wasn't any food. Now, if you went to the Jewish service, they did have donuts. So the good thing was to go to the Jewish service and get donuts afterwards. At my chapel service, the only time I remember that we actually had food was towards the end of basic training. But they go for one of the main reasons, get away from the drill sergeant. Who wants, day in and day out, people screaming and yelling at you? It gets old after a while. So Sunday, for at least an hour, you can kind of have a semi-break from somebody screaming and yelling at you. So we go to chapel. At Christian services, the chapel services offered at basic training, we mentioned some of them. There's Jewish services. They have either Roman Catholic services. They have, but your general Protestant services. And that's the one that, during that basic combat training phase, that I went to was the general Protestant services. So you're talking people from your United Pentecostal all the way over to maybe some Lutherans. I wasn't Lutheran at the time when I went through basic training. Presbyterians, you have everybody from every Protestant denomination probably is in that service. Your chaplain, who knows what background they come from. What's interesting is that they lump Mormons in with the Protestant folks. So if you're lucky or unlucky, you might get a Mormon chaplain that preaches to you on a Sunday morning. We'll talk a little bit about that as we go on. Christian faith and basic training certainly can be challenging, is very challenging. And I came from a very devoted, very devout household, but going to basic training and finding that most people, 98% probably, didn't share my faith, didn't share my beliefs, had nothing in common with me. That's very discouraging when you're all by yourself and you're alone. Here I am at basic training. I'm alone. Nobody can empathize with me. They don't understand where I've come from. So you have that challenge, and you hope that while you're there, you're going to meet people that, yes, we share a common Christian faith. We share some of these same values. And so often, it's not the case. So it can be very, very discouraging. But one of the things that really did help me through basic training was those nights of being in the Word. And the power of the Word. We talked about that a lot as Lutherans. And I remember many nights, it'd be about 2100 hours, which would be 9 p.m. for civilians out there. And 9 p.m. was generally lights out, they'd play taps, and then it was, all right, get in your bunk. And that was a time when letter writing was done home. And I was on the top bunk, so closest, of course, to the ceiling. And I remember sitting there, I'd write letters, but then I had my flashlight attached to the ceiling tiles, and I had it down, so I was able to read the Word of God at basic training. And reading those Psalms, which somebody said one time, the Psalms express every emotion out there. Reading the Psalms was very comforting to me and gave me a lot of hope. And definitely family members back at home supported as well with prayers, but definitely that Word was what got me through basic training. On top of that, if it wasn't for the Word, I don't know how I would have done, because so many emotions are going through your head. Again, I'm alone. What did I get myself into? I did write a letter home saying I made a mistake. I was wrong. I don't know, what to do. I'm in for the next 4 years. How am I going to get through this? Fortunately, that was only for a phase. Got beyond that. But the Word got me through. Because even your chaplain sometimes, they're not, it's not always the best. I'm friends with a lot of chaplains. Our chaplain at basic training was Korean, so there was a language barrier there to a certain extent, especially with quite a heavy accent. But I don't know if he was the most motivated chaplain. I believe I heard him preach the same sermon twice while I was there. And that's only in 9 weeks. So I don't know, maybe he just does a rotation every 9 weeks. So that's basic training for you. Basic training, mine was 9 weeks. I was there at Fort Jackson for about a period of 10 weeks. After that, we graduate, and we go on to our next slide. We go to advanced individual training. Now, the picture that you see in the background, this would have been kind of what my advanced individual training consisted of. My first MOS, which, what is MOS, specific term, who can tell me? Military Occupational Specialty. My first job in the military was watercraft operator. Believe it or not, the Army has more boats than the Navy. So I was a watercraft operator in 88 Kilo, that's our technical term, for it. And I went to Fort Eustis, and we did what we call a field exercise. It was more of a water exercise, because we were on the water in on Chesapeake Bay. Out on our boats there, there's firing the 50 cal. We did things like that out there. So that's kind of what you're seeing in the background. AIT is very toned down from basic training. When I went through AIT, there was drill sergeants there. That's changed now. They no longer have drill sergeants at AIT, called platoon sergeants. Basically, they have the same responsibilities. They just don't get the same pay. And certainly, it's like, oh, I wish I could be free of the drill sergeants, but it was very toned down. So that was kind of nice. The challenges at AIT is, it comes with the territory. Because you're there to learn a job, you're there to get more education. So you're in a classroom setting a lot of the time. So when you go into a classroom setting, what's going to be expected of you, certain phases of that education. You're going to have to take tests. So there's lots of studying that goes on. And there's that, but there's more freedom as well. On the weekends, you get a chance to go maybe off post or to the PX without a drill sergeant going along. But those same benefits of freedom in education and advanced individual training, I think, can also potentially be a detriment as well if you don't watch it. Education, because you're studying for tests, the temptation to not devote so much time in the Word, maybe as you previously did because you're trying to study for tests. So the temptation to get away from the Word, to be in your study materials and kind of get lopsided that way. Also the temptation with freedom. When you are given a chance to go off post and freedom on the weekends, temptation's there. Why would I go to church when I have the chance to do something fun that I haven't been able to do for 2 or 3 months? I've been cooped up and now I want to get everything out of my system that's been pent up in there. So again, there are some of the challenges that you face with your Christian faith at AIT. There's more of a chance at AIT that you would actually be able to go to a church of your choice, especially because a lot of times you are allowed off post. For the Lutheran soldier, depending on where you're at, for the confessional Lutheran soldier, I should say, you may or may not find a church that would be beneficial to you off post. After being stationed at Fort Eustis for a while, I did find there was a Wisconsin Synod church that was off post. I never made it down there. Of course, at that time I wasn't Lutheran. But a lot of places, I kind of short on confessional Lutheran churches near our military bases. Fortunately, Pastor Colloway here, I know you live right next to a military base. That's a blessing. The religious services offered a basic training. Again, the same that you see at AIT is the same that you see at basic training. But again, the challenge is of making sure that you do take time for the Word and time for fellowship with those of like faith. So we're going to go on, and again, as we go through, ask questions here. So let's go on to the next slide. Permanent party. This is what happens to you after you complete your MOS training. So for me, I was stationed at Fort Eustis. I did my MOS training there, and then I got stationed there immediately afterward. There's only 2 places that an 88 kilo watercraft operator could be stationed. It was Fort Eustis or Hawaii, and I got Fort Eustis. Not many people were fortunate to get Hawaii. Permanent party. For the single soldiers, for most single soldiers, you live in the barracks. And this is what you see back here. When you think about barracks, don't think about Gomer Pyle. Those days are long gone for most soldiers. You live in more of a college dorm type of buildings. For the married soldiers, of course, you're either living on or off post. And you do have I would say a decently large group of geo-bachelors in the Army. Who could tell me what a geo-bachelor is?
Life's on a different continent or
Correct. So at Fort McCoy, we see a lot of geo or geographical bachelors. A lot of husbands were deployed, but the wives stayed either, they stayed back where they previously lived because their kids are in school and they don't want to move. So that, being a geo-bachelor, presents its own set of unique challenges. There, I think having a family with you really can strengthen your faith because you've got a partner there to keep you accountable on that. For the single soldiers, the challenges, and notice I said the barracks are like college dorms. So think of college life, partying every weekend. I saw it all the time. Numerous times the cops would be called because the soldiers would get out of hand. That's a lot of what you see with the single soldiers on the weekend. So temptation to get caught up in that lifestyle, and then again, not devoting time to the word, not devoting time to fellowship. Again, for soldiers, temptation to have permanent party, some of the temptations I think that people can also face as a Christian or a Lutheran Christian would be the temptation to be ecumenical. I mentioned that word earlier, because again, there's not always that opportunity to fellowship at a confessional Lutheran church. That's some. Do you have a question?
Well, I was just curious, like with the married families, does the military, do they do anything special to help out with the families when they're going through that separation? Or I mean, either before they go or after, like when they return to kind of.
Oh, as far as
especially with like the geo-bachelors, like you got your family living over here and you're over in Timbuktu, and then.
Well, I think your question was more going to be related to deployment,
Okay.
not so much geographical bachelor. When you're deployed, you're not a geographical bachelor. Yes, you are, but not in the technical sense of the term.
Okay.
So I'll kind of talk, we'll get into that just a little bit there. Again, but one of the biggest challenges I think at permanent party, especially when you don't have that confessional Lutheran church, is that temptation to be ecumenical. Let's go on to the next slide. So this phase is a deployment phase. Everybody, they always think about deployment when they think about the military, they think about soldiers. When you think about deployment, don't automatically assume deployment to, say, Iraq or Afghanistan. It doesn't always necessarily mean deployment to combat. Lots of people deploy to Kosovo and Albania. Who knew that we still had soldiers in Kosovo? A lot of soldiers. And they're deployed fairly often. You have a lot of reserve component soldiers, especially mailroom, postal people, human resources. They are deployed over there quite often to provide support. So that's to Kosovo, Albania. We have people deployed sometimes to South America. We have people right now in Poland, especially with the recent Russian aggression. But of course, again, deployment can also be in places like combat, which would be right now primarily Afghanistan, a little bit of Iraq. The challenges, it's easier for the soldier to be deployed than the family at home, the family they leave behind. The soldier who's deployed, yes, they have the concerns, they're over in Iraq or wherever they may be, they have the concerns at home, well, how is my wife going to do it? How are my kids going to do it? I'm not there to provide guidance. But who's the one that's having to pick up where dad left off? That's mom. And that is quite a challenge. One of our people at St. Paul's in Toma, the church I attend, he just got back from deployment. And I know for his wife, this year, on that deployment, and he's been deployed 2 or 3 times before, but she said there was a lot of tears this year. And she and her girls are, well, one just graduated high school, the other's still in middle school. So very challenging for the spouse that's left behind, what they have to pick up. The challenges are there for when the soldier's away, but also the challenges when the soldier comes back, because they've had a family that's learned to somewhat live without them and become independent. So they have to try to get reintegrated into that family life. And being the spiritual head of a home, which is super important, which kind of is somewhat taken away as you're deployed. Some of the challenges while you're overseas to faith would be kind of what you have back in basic training. You go from maybe you had a Lutheran church you attended, and then you go overseas, and I about guarantee you, you're not going to have a Lutheran service. Once in a while, you might, but that's very rare. And you don't have a Lutheran service to attend people of like faith. How does that also, how can that affect us in other ways? Anybody have an idea? What's one thing that's very important to us Lutherans, or should be important?
The sacrament.
The sacrament. Think about a year, going a year, potentially a year without the sacrament. So what might the temptation be while you're overseas?
Go commune at a.
Go commune at a general Protestant service or Roman Catholic service. And I don't want to get ahead of myself because we're going to talk about it more. But that can be really a challenge because everybody else is going to communion, but you're not because you don't share that same like faith. Now, fortunately, we do have a civilian chaplain in the Wells. He's the head of the civilian chaplains, Pastor Zemer. And I know once in a while he's able to get over to some of these places and do a service. But that might be, at the most, maybe once a year or twice a year. Again, very limited opportunities to receive the sacrament, receive that blessing. Talk about confession and absolution. Where are you going to go confess to when you're overseas? You know, I suppose, I don't know if being on the phone is the same thing, but, you know, there's really there's nobody. So there's that, there's lots of temptations, I think, towards the faith out there. But how do we stay steadfast in our faith and go back to the Word? That's the Word. That's what keeps us steadfast. So, of course, when people return from deployment, as I said, you have to reintegrate with the family. A lot of soldiers come back with, injuries. You hear about PTSD a lot. PTSD doesn't always happen from combat. PTSD happens from when they brought that soldier in who was injured, and you were the medic taking care of him, or the nurse taking care of him, and the sights and the injuries that you had to behold. Or even for those, I was on a humanitarian deployment to Haiti, for those who had to pull people from the rubble, human remains. That's those images stay in your mind forever. And so just remember that PTSD isn't always the combat related. It can be different events that affect that. Let's go to the next slide. So we've talked a lot about challenges, and what do you think as a group? I mean, just give me some answers. What could be a danger? What is a danger to Lutheran soldiers in the military? Dangers. Maybe there's more than one. Anybody have any ideas or thoughts that they might be?
I suppose beginning to compromise your faith in those settings where you're looking at, like you hardly ever even see a Lutheran, I suppose.
Eventually losing your faith because nobody else is with you there, and you're like, well, they're just gonna do it with me, and then it'll just stop.
And that's very interesting that you bring up that point. And last night, as Pastor Loringer was giving the sermon, and he was talking about, of course, the different languages at Pentecost, but also saying how, as Christians, people that speak a different language from us, not say English language, but speak a different language. And when you are with day in and day out people that speak a different language, it does get hard. And what happens is, and I think this probably happens for all soldiers serving, that you're in this day in, day out, you hear what comes out of people's mouths, you see what their lives are like, you see all the problems, and it gets in your head whether you want it to or not. So some of the very things that people spout off, they're in your head. You have to you have to really be on your guard that you don't end up where they are. And it does happen, because of course we're sinners and we all fall. But that's one of the big, I think that's one of the big challenges that soldiers face. The specific challenge, anybody have any other ideas of challenges?
Well, I mean, you talked about being in a word, which is obviously good, but we still have a need to worship together as a body of believers. We're communal. And, you know, like, even civilians, you know, a pastor will come to a person who's a last member, and they'll say, I can worship just fine from home, reading my Bible. And if it's not true for us, it's not true for soldiers even more so.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. And these answers really all play into kind of or they kind of go along with the answer that I have, which is, and it's like I mentioned before, ecumenicalism. I think that's one of the biggest dangers that we face as Lutheran Christians in the military, because there's so many people from different backgrounds, different faiths. We'll go to the next slide because I want to talk about this. Here you see a chapel up there, and then you see down at the bottom, looks like soldiers that are deployed. The chaplain's praying with them before they go. I think, I've heard, sometimes I get the impression that people from well-meaning people are like, well, you know, if say for those of us stationed stateside and we're not near a Lutheran church, well, just, you know, every couple months drive a couple hours or 3 hours, whatever it might be, to a Lutheran church and receive the sacrament and, you know, and be satisfied with that. And I think what they don't realize is how hard it is, because you said we're made for fellowship with one another, and as believers in Jesus Christ, I think it's a natural thing to want to fellowship with those of like faith. Now, there's a lot of good Christians in the military, obviously not non-Lutherans, but there still is a lot of good Christians. And so I know for myself, my wife, I mean, we have people over to our house for dinner that I work with that are, again, very strong Christians, but they're certainly not Lutheran. You know, so what the temptation you end up facing is, well, they go to a church every Sunday, and, well, why can't you go with us? You know, you should go with us. Okay, well, maybe we'll go once or twice. So why aren't you going to communion? And it just ends up a snowball effect and all these different things that you face. It's really hard. It's a lot harder than I think most people realize. One of the areas that ecumenicalism is, I think, rife, just because of the nature of the job, is the chaplaincy. I really applaud our Wisconsin sit-in for not putting military chaplains in there, because as a military chaplain, you are expected to preside, give invocations and benedictions at change of command ceremonies. When you give those invocation and benedictions, what do you think's left out a lot of times? Jesus. Yeah. There's no Jesus. For most Christians, they can probably tell, okay, who he's talking about or is alluding to, but there's no Jesus. And if you have Christianity without Jesus, there is no Christianity, really. But you see that a lot of times. Back to that general Protestant worship service. So here's an experience of my own. Taught, and this goes with the chaplains as well. Being at AIT at Fort Eustis, I went to the 8th Brigade Chapel. Remember, I wasn't Lutheran at the time, so I went to the chapel. And Chaplain Saxton got up there and he preached, well, I guess, looking back, it wasn't a good sermon. At that point, I didn't really know. But he preached a sermon, and then at the end, they always had communion, so we all partook in communion. And I did that, I think, another week. Well, then I went, and after AIT, I graduated. I got stationed at Fort Eustis. Lo and behold, he was my battalion chaplain. And when you are stationed permanent party at a post, you do what they call an in-processing. So you go around to all these different little buildings, and they sign your paper saying, you went and saw the hospital, they have your medical records, you went and saw the chaplain, so you know where to go if you need help with something or that. So I went to the chaplain for him to sign off my paper, and it was Chaplain Saxton. And lo and behold, Chaplain Saxton was a Mormon chaplain. So, those Sundays, we communed, and some of you probably are horrified, and I don't blame you. those Sundays we communed, it was a communion service that was presided over by a Mormon chaplain. And I'm going to say that's not good. And we all know that's not good. And the thing was, there was really, in my experience with Army chapels, there's not, they don't get up there and say, well, I'm Chaplain Johnson and this is my background. No. I mean, you just go and here's the chaplain preaching, giving the sermon. And so anyway, looking back, look at what danger people really got themselves into. First of all, looking back, it was a crossless and a Christless sermon. They don't, the Mormon church, we all know, has nothing in common with us, or maybe the name church, but that's about it. So, needless to say, big issues. Also another, and I just remember this as I was doing getting ready this presentation. I went to the post chapel most of my time while at Fort Eustis. Once in a while I would go visit a church post. And for a while, about 2 or 3 months, I was visiting an Assembly of God church because that was my background at the time. And this Assembly of God church was a new upstart church. Well, they got into a new building and so they were going to have a big dedication. So I went down there for the dedication, and partially because the chief of chaplains for the United States Army was friends with the pastors of this church. And he actually had a Southern Baptist background. But anyway, so he was going to come down and speak at the dedication of this Assembly of God church. Well, so he came down and preached a sermon. I really forget entirely what the sermon was all about, but I do remember this. He said, while they were deployed, and they had a communion service. And now this is Southern Baptist, mind you, so this was actually kind of surprising even that. But he said, so, we had a communion service, and it was wonderful. We had Christians, and we had Muslims, and everybody coming forward to communion. At that time, I wasn't a Lutheran, but even I knew better at that time that was wrong. You see what ecumenicalism intentionally or unintentionally can turn into. That's what it turned into. So that's why I say that is a big challenge. Certainly for the enlisted soldiers, we're not going to be, we're not chaplains, but we deal with the chaplains on a daily basis. We see them, they're in our units. There's a lot of good chaplains out there, and I'm very thankful for that. I'm friends with a lot of good chaplains. But certainly you have your chaplains out there that have, I'd say, let that spirit, that interfaith spirit, pervade and kind of take over. Anybody have thoughts on this? I mean, some of these things are probably pretty horrifying. Greg?
I work at the VA in Toma, and we have a chapel there. And Jesus is on the cross above the altar, behind the curtain. Mm-hmm. And they have used the chapel. They're changing it now. They put in an auditorium type thing, but they were using the chapel for town halls and stuff for different meetings. And we had a PR person in there, and she was asking for those clips, those squeeze, spring clips, because she wanted to clip the curtain shut. And she told the tech that was helping her, "We don't want Jesus popping up." Yeah. And he actually responded with, maybe we wouldn't be in the condition we were in if Jesus popped out once in a while. But I mean, it's very disturbing to sit in there and have Jesus covered.
Well, look at that bottom left picture there. What do you see?
Yeah.
A curtain. And the curtain serves a couple purposes. There might be a baptismal tank behind there. I know the chapel for Eustis there was. But it's also that they can turn that into for any faith or whatever event it might be. Chester, you had a question?
Yeah.
Or a thought?
I'll ask you in a second. I was listening to what you were saying.
Okay.
I got my question.
Chester, comment?
It's not necessarily surprising to find out that chaplains who come from everywhere, I mean, I don't know if the Army does, but I know there are Wiccan chaplains and even a group trying to get an atheist chaplain, but which is no different than if you were to just wander around aimlessly and go into a random church on Sunday, you're going to find crazy stuff. My advice to soldiers: do not expect the chaplain to be all that much useful to you as far as doing anything, but chaplains are required to do two things, and that is to either perform or provide. And that the providing is when they can't perform something. So if a Lutheran comes to them and says, I'm a Lutheran, I want Lutheran, part of their job is to, if at all reasonable or possible, is to find you a Lutheran. You know, and of course we don't have chaplains in uniform, so that causes a problem for us. But seeing them also saying, yeah, they may be worthless, or some more worthless than others, but what their use is more likely to be is that they are a person that can get help, more specific help.
Right.
And so the old advice was just ignore the chaplain. But I usually tell people, no, go and tell them that you're a confessional Lutheran.
Yeah. I know my sister just graduated, back in February, she graduated Air Force basic training. She's a confessional Missouri Synod. And she went to the chaplain and told them that she wanted communion, but she it had to be from a Missouri Synod. So fortunately in San Antonio, there's lots of Lutheran churches right outside the gate, so they were able to get her somebody for that.
As a follow-up, we had the same thing in Fort Bliss. Wisconsin National Guard unit was deploying, and they were out training, some out in the desert by El Paso, out at McGregor Range, and a group from Wisconsin naturally had a number of Wills members in there. All they had to do was ask, and the Army gave them 2 vans to drive to church.
Yeah.
Because they made the request for the accommodation, and they let them go. And they gave them the vans to go. So they are useful in that.
Yes, and there's, again, I'm friends with a lot of chaplains. There's some very good chaplains out there. Some excellent chaplains. Not only they're good at performing and providing, but they're pretty solid in their Christian faith. But then you've got some of those out there that you sit back. Yes.
How does the Missouri Synod do it? Because don't they have enlisted chaplains?
No, they have chaplains in the United States, throughout the military, and they're commissioned officers.
Chaplains are all.
Yeah.
Okay.
And, we had a Missouri, I came across, in my time at Fort Eustis, 2 Missouri Synod chaplains. The one was a chaplain candidate, so he had been through seminary, was a pastor, but then he had to be a candidate for 2 or 3 years, because to be a chaplain, you have to pastor, or the Missouri Synod's requirement is that you have to pastor at the parish for 3 or 4 years, something like that, before you actually can be that, a full chaplain in the military. The one was the chaplain candidate. He came through. I remember he preached at the main post chapel. Wow, he was really good. Because at the main post chapel, we had the cross behind the altar, and it was on a stand, and the stand would rotate. So when you rotated it, there was a crucifix on one side. One side was with the body of Christ on the cross. The other side was just blank. So he was preaching his sermon to 250 Protestants, and he walked. I remember it was a very good sermon. I don't remember exactly what it was. It was about, of course, Jesus, the gospel, him dying for our sins. And he walked over and he turned that around. We need to see this. So I'm sure some of the people were horrified in there because they turned that around. That's only supposed to be for the Catholics. The Catholics are in there. Yeah. The other Missouri Synod chaplain. I don't know what happened there. I think it was, I don't know. I think he came in solid, but maybe not as solid. Nothing against Missouri Synod people. It was my observation.
They're still under the same rules, right? They have to meet whoever asks.
Not necessarily. I do remember that there was before my time, they had a chaplain, and it had to have been Missouri. I'm sure it was not Elka, that said they could preach at a service, but they would not preside over communion. So,
It's actually easier for them to enforce close communion in some cases because they have a chaplain's assistant who is armed as their usher.
that's right.
And so, there are rules, and so if the chaplain says we practice closed communion, I only commune Missouri Synod members, that's the order from an officer. It's actually easier
Yes.
in some cases.
Also, a point of interest, Bill Schleisner over here in the red shirt, his brother is a Naval Reserve chaplain in the Missouri Synod. So, and he just got back from deployment last year. And actually, when he was deployed, his brother was deployed, and one of our members got deployed. It's the same place. So he was able to actually provide some ministry to our member being, in that being professional. So that was.
I don't mean to take you off track from this discussion, but by the way, Pastor Zemer served a vacancy for us in Savannah. Actually baptized my firstborn, so we heard a lot of his stories from serving as a military chaplain. But along the lines of you said it's important for soldiers to be in the Word at the very least, and there are deployment zones where if you're in a Muslim region or an Islamic country that you can't have the Bible with
You can have it with you. You cannot proselytize.
okay.
So you can't, when you're out on patrol or going into the community, when you encounter members, you cannot proselytize those of a different faith.
So in your experience, do people use those like Bible memory sticks and things like that to like the audio memory
Is
sticks?
that like the little packs that the Wells puts together?
I'm not sure if it's
Because I got a pack one time from the Wells that had something in there.
It's a cheap MP3 player.
Oh, okay.
That's
So,
not fun.
honestly, I don't know the answer to that question. I don't think so. I mean, I've never used it. I don't even know if I've seen it. Fortunately, one thing that is positive, there's plenty of Bibles available to you. That the chaplain's office usually has whole row of Bibles that you can just take and you can make your own. They've got our favorite version, the NIV, but it was kind of nice to see that the chaplain section in my current unit actually had some ESV in there too. So there is, you definitely have the Word available to you. Just make sure that you don't proselytize people, otherwise you could end up.
In the beginning, you said that you were glad that the Wells did not have military chaplains, at least that were officers. Why is that again? Or at least
Because
I'm not
when you-
seeing why. Because Missouri Synod has them, and they don't have to commune people outside of their synod. Why? What's the problem then? Exactly.
They have to go provide benedictions and vacations at change of
Oh,
ministry.
right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Where they're watered down prayers. I mean, some of them may be able to get outside of that, but I will say this. When you are a battalion chaplain, so battalion, you have a company level, which is about 400 soldiers. Above the company, you have a battalion. And you're the battalion, they don't have chaplains at the company level, they're at the battalion level, so for about 2,000 soldiers or so. When that battalion commander leaves, or the new one comes in, they usually have what they call a change command ceremony, and they usually require a benediction or an invocation most of the time. And I suppose the chaplain could get out of it. But remember, we have what we call in the military a rating system. I have for the NCOs, it's the NCOER, the non-commissioned officer evaluation rating. For the officers, it's officer evaluation rating. You have a rater. So my rater is the guy who writes on my rating is Sergeant Mansell, Above him, the senior raider, is Captain Jones. For that battalion chaplain, who do you think their raider is going to be? The battalion commander. And those ratings can make or sink a career. So, can you imagine the pressure that would be on to provide invocations, benedictions, and other services that you might feel go against you?
Technically, he can say no to anything.
Yes.
He is not, in fact, he is required to only teach the tenets of his church. If the church's endorsement gets pulled, if he does something that he's not supposed to, he's out immediately. If like the church has more, can pull a chaplain quicker than the military can. So technically he can, but what you say is right, that the chance of your rating, you not get promoted, all of that is persecution.
Yeah, that's my question there. We spent a lot of time on this ecumenicalism part, which the other day when I was rehearsing this with a few people, we spent a lot of discussion on this just because there's so much involved with it. Any more questions on this before we move on? Because we're starting to get towards the end. Okay, so we talked a lot about challenges. It's like, well, I'm not going to join the military because there's too many challenges. It seems like there's a lot of negatives, things to face. But our next slide, what's the good stuff? We go to the next slide. As a soldier, we get to live our vocation. Now, I didn't do the font and that quite right, so it might be a little bit hard to read. Certainly, and you remember what vocation, the meaning of that from the very beginning, kind of a special calling. Yes, we think of vocations a lot of times as pastors, things like that. But yes, even in our, say, civilian capacity or military capacity, what we do is a vocation. This is where God has placed us and where He wants us to live out our Christian faith. We get to show the love of Christ. Our living our vocation is by showing the love of Christ by serving. If you want a chance to serve people in, the military is the place to do it. There's so many people to serve. It's your fellow soldiers, their family members, the people that you meet overseas. You have an opportunity to serve all those people. You serve your fellow soldiers, maybe helping them do PT. Somebody that's struggling with PT, you get out there, help them get better on their run or do more push-ups. You serve family members. You have, a lot of times you might be stationed back here, a unit went forward, and you have family members that are left behind. You have that opportunity to go to those family members, say, how can we help you? How can we help with the kids? What's going to make this easier for you? Those overseas, I remember being in Haiti, and we went to, actually the UMT, the unit ministry team, had done a trip. They organized trips to a local orphanage, Notre Maison, which is our house. And they had some damage. It wasn't terrible damage, but they had some. So we went there, helped them kind of clean up a little bit. But then we also had a lot of times with the kids. And these were kids that their parents, a lot of them had been abandoned their kids because they had physical disabilities or mental disabilities. So we had a good opportunity to sit down with those kids, to hold them, to sing to them, just be with them, and really show the love of Christ to kids who have been rejected by the general public. So great opportunities. That we get to even live our vocation by our participation in warfare. And that's, we all think about people deploying a lot of times, but at least for myself, I always think about, with deployment, okay, well, how many people did Sergeant Jones kill today? How many, what was he doing? I think we sometimes like to gloss over that a little bit, try to get away from the realities of war. But you can be assured, as a soldier, you get to live your vocation out. Luther talked about this a little bit here. Well, actually, does somebody have a Bible here that they could open up to Romans chapter 13? And it's, I forget what verse it is, but it's a part about the government being there for our good. Can you read that, Pastor? That'd be the... Just read from 13:1. Well, actually, let me see here.
Verse 4.
Verse 4. I'll read it here. It says, for rulers, okay, let every person be subject to the governing authorities, for there's no authority except from God, and those that exist have been instituted by God. Therefore, whoever resists the authorities resists what God has appointed, and those who resist will incur judgment. For rulers are not a terror to good conduct, but to bad. And then going down to verse 4, for he, talking about the ruler, is God's servant for your good. So as a soldier, as a member of the military, you're kind of serving in that role as working for the ruler. And part of a lot of, say, rulers, in our case, as a president, as a Congress, it's not necessarily a king. A lot of times we end up in war. We'll get into wars for various reasons. And it can be a question, is this a just war? Can I go out to Iraq? Can I take lives if I need to? And somebody said, well, if somebody's shooting at you, of course you're going to shoot back at them and take their lives. But the taking of human life, a burden on many people who have, because of necessity, have participated in that, their consciences, they've struggled a lot with that. But yes, even the taking of human life overseas can be fulfilling our vocation and where the Lord has put us. And we specifically look, what really helped me with this, because I even had questions about that, but in studying and getting ready for this presentation, reading what Martin Luther had to say about it, if everybody wants to look at there, Can Soldiers Be Christians? It's your little handout. It's going to be on page. Up here. And I would actually suggest that everybody go ahead and at some point read all of this, because Luther really covers a lot of this. Let's see here. I've got two quotes from Luther's, and I have to find where the first one is in here. The last quote is going to be on the last page, or where's that end? Well, I'm just going to read the first quote, which is in there. I just don't remember where it's at in there. So when people have questions about, can I actually go to war and live my vocation? This is what Martin Luther had to say. By thus and this fashion, they should be addressed. Comrades, we stand here in the service and obedience of our prince, for us, President of Congress, being bound by God's will and love to support our sovereign with life and property. Though in God's eyes we are wretched sinners, just as much as our enemies are, yet since we know or know not otherwise, but that our prince is right in this cause, and are thus certain that we are serving God by our service and obedience, therefore let every man be bold and fearless, and think only that his hand is God's hand, and his pipe God's pipe, and cry with heart and voice, for God and the emperor. If God gives us the victory, the honor and praise shall not be ours, but his, who accomplishes it through us poor sinners. But the spoils and the pay we will accept as given and bestowed by his divine kindness and favor upon us unworthy men, and thank him from our hearts. Now as God will, upon them with joy. So Luther says, if you know, or you don't know, but that you're fighting in a just cause, you can go and you can fight without reservation. You can put your all into that. And to me, as a soldier, that really spoke to me, kind of helped give me a little piece about even living in my vocation. I'm thankful I've never had to take a human life. I hope I don't ever have to. If I'm placed in a war, that is certainly, if it would be a just war, hopefully, and I had this and that opportunity or faced with that, God give me strength to live out my vocation that way. The other quote that I wanted to read. This was at the end on page 544. And this is for the soldier as they prepare to go into battle. And in the prayer that maybe they would pray as they go into that, understand that you have a lot in war, a lot of soldiers, nominal Christians, lots of people get, at least outwardly get faith when it comes to war. But you'll see a lot of people maybe play to superstitions or different things like that. A lot of time, one of the common prayers that you'll see for the Roman Catholics is Saint Michael the Archangel, defend us in the day of battle. And then you have a picture of the Archangel Michael defeating Satan, which is certainly that is certainly biblical, but they're invoking Michael. I don't think, and pastors can correct me if I'm wrong, I think the proper way would be, Lord, send Michael, the archangel, to defend me, or defend me in the day of battle, instead of invoking the Saint Michael, but praying to the Lord for His protection and to send Saint Michael to defend us. I don't know. Is that kind of, pastor? Kind of see what I'm getting at there? Right? Anyway, well, Luther kind of addressed that. And it was on the part that he called it was on faith and luck. But this is what he said to the soldiers that as they prepared to go into battle. Down in, it's on 544. It's in the 6th or 7th line. It says, "But thus should they do when the battle approaches and the admonition has been made, which I mentioned above. Then let them simply commend themselves to the mercy of God and behave in this matter like Christians. For in that admonition is set forth merely the form in which one may go about the outward work of war with a good conscience. But inasmuch as no good work is sufficient for salvation, every man should say or think to himself after that admonition, Heavenly Father, here I am by thy divine will in this outward work in service of my sovereign, as is my duty, first of all to thee, and then to my sovereign for thy sake. And I thank thy grace and mercy that thou hast placed me in this work, where I am sure that it is not sin, but right and agreeable obedience to thy will. But because I know and have learned from thy gracious word that that none of our works can help us, and that no one is saved as a soldier, but only as a Christian, neither will I rely upon this my obedience and work, but I will do it freely in service to thy will, while believing heartily that nothing but the innocent blood of thy dear Son, my Lord Jesus Christ, can redeem and save, which he shed for me in the obedience to thy divine will. I stay by this, I live and die by this, I fight and do everything by it. Dear Lord and Father, keep and strengthen this belief in me by thy Spirit. Amen." And then he says, if after that thou say the creed in the Lord's Prayer, you may do so. And let that be enough. And then it says, then commend body and soul into his hands, and draw and strike in God's. So I don't know about all of you, but for me, as one that serves in the military, that really speaks to my heart, that I know that I can go into battle, give my all in battle. This is where God has placed me. Obviously, looking at the admonition set before, it's a right and just cause, but this is where God has placed me, and I can go live my vocation. I don't know if I answered the question what it means to be Christian in the military or not. I think I hope that you all have a better idea of what it is to be a Christian in the military, the challenges we face, but the opportunities that we also have. Before we end, is there any follow-up questions for me that I didn't answer, I should answer better? Got a question there?
So, technically, now I'm in the Air Force, and I'm in the Civil Air Patrol, and so we became something more of a part of the Air Force as the auxiliary. And I'm certain that it's the only way that a guy with glasses and hearing aids can get into the Air Force. But one of the things that I found joining CAP in South Dakota is that the Christians are far more forward about their beliefs and practices than they have been in the Seattle area, for example. And we went to a training program out at Ellsworth Air Force Base near Rapid City, and the training was taking place, and then there were the wives of guys out there brought in lunch for us. I mean, this only happens in the Midwest. And before lunch, we said a meal prayer, in the name of Jesus mentioned and everything like that, And I think it's interesting that I wanted to ask you if you felt like different bases in different parts of the country experienced different expressions of Christian faith from people based on sort of the local culture, because in Seattle there are not a lot of Christians. It's the best time to be on the freeway is on Sunday morning, for example. So I'm just curious about that, because I've noticed a difference in different parts of the country.
Yeah, I mean, I think really it depends on where. Sometimes Eureka Station, as you said, Seattle area, not a lot of Christians there. You go to Fort Eustis, I'd say any military post in the South. I mean, and again, you are. I just don't get stationed at Fort Eustis that I want it to be. I mean, they put me there, or they'll send me to Fort Bragg or wherever it may be. But certainly that local culture can infiltrate to that military base. But and looking at Fort McCoy, and Craig might be able to talk to this a little bit because he's worked there too. As far as our local culture infiltrating Fort McCoy, I mean, as far as Christian culture, I'm not sure how it has or how it hasn't. I don't know if it's just geographical, but it certainly can make an impact where you are stationed. Because you're influenced by people outposts, you're influenced by the people outposts.
I'm curious to hear what maybe some other pastors think about Luther's statement. I don't remember exactly where it was, but where he says of soldiers that if you're serving in a just war, or if the prince's cause is just, then your conscience is clear. That could potentially backfire and create guilt on a soldier's conscience if he has to decide, okay, now is this a just war or not? And there's a lot of Christians that come down on either side, whether the Iraq war was actually just, there were no WFDs and we thought there were. So does that mean, so just my thought on that is that it's not for soldiers to decide on their own if the war is just or not, because even if it's not a just war in whoever's opinion or God's opinion, he can still serve his vocation faithfully. He can still be a Christian while not, as long as his commanding officer doesn't give him a direct order that would conflict with God's commandment, he can still follow orders, his conscience can still be clear.
That's a good observation. And a lot of Christians, especially in the Iraq war, came down on either side of whether we should have been there or not. I think maybe this is answering it, maybe it's not. It's another Luther thing here. He says, well, because, I don't know. Somebody else asked a question.
I'm not sure if Luther addresses it in this document or if it's elsewhere, but it basically instructs and says if the one who gives the order lies in what the cause is, he's responsible for that lie. So if he lies and says we're going in for this reason, this just reason to defend these people, turns out he was doing it out of greed and to design and conquest. He's responsible for that.
It's under the abuse of war.
Yeah, and then there's fighting in a wrong cause on page 541 as well, talks about that. And it also talks in here, now we don't have time to go through all of it since we're just about done. Yeah, the abuse of war on page 528. And then Hume talks about disposing of insane or tyrannical sovereigns. He does have a section in here where he says only defensive war is justified. He have superiors warring on inferiors, war and pillage, gain. He says, here, this is for fighting for gain. That's kind of interesting. True indeed it is that if anyone goes to war with heart and mind set on nothing but gaining, it says, health and temporal gain is his only reason, so that he is unwilling to have peace and sorry when there is not war. He has left the right road and is the devil's own, even if he fights under the orders and summons of his sovereign. But then on 5:41, it talks about fighting in a wrong cause. Talks about godless soldiers. Talks about faith and love. And about faith in God. And so I think we're going to have to practice.
One quick question that won't have a quick answer, I don't think. I know that we hold Luther's namesake in our religion, and I know he has volumes of writings. We don't consider them scriptural, though. They're not without error, like the Gospels and the writings that are in the Bible, correct? I mean, so even with this writing, can we, you know what I mean? It's still, even though it's said this way by Luther, can we say, well, that's, I don't necessarily agree the way he's saying this particular thing, or that makes sense? I mean,
Yeah.
You can disagree with Luther. That's okay.
huh?
You can disagree with Luther.
Okay.
But we hear it.
Reason to,
We hear it. We disagree with it, just like you disagree. You know, if you disagree with your pastor on something, we go back to the scriptures and see right. And he's not the only one who's written on war and soldiers and that calling. Jesus speaks to soldiers, and he doesn't tell them to leave their position. He tells them not to extort money, and you know, he tells them to be good soldiers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wondered how we look at the writings of Luther, because I mean,
Yeah, it's not an authority as such.
And to follow up on that, I mean, St. Augustine is kind of, you know, the big name when it comes to just war theory. Although, in discussions and writings I recently read, a lot of the received wisdom that we assume is St. Augustine's is actually not exactly what he was getting at in his actual writings. So a good example to read the primary texts, I'm not sure. But things like proportionality in war, don't attack civilians, defensive wars are typically going to be just, right, self-defense. Things like that. And a lot of that's just a smart Christian kind of just gathered up all these ideas and kind of collected them. Because a lot of those I think most people would agree with on basic grounds of morality.
It's interesting you bring up Augustine. One of the more interesting interactions I've had, and this is my theory for why a lot of what he says gets misinterpreted, is because most of the people thinking about Augustine on just war are either examining it from the Catholic tradition, or are actually Catholic and writing about it from the Catholic ethical tradition. And they almost always parse him through the lens of Thomas Aquinas, who takes sort of Augustine's general principles, but then, as he always does, vastly expands them into a whole network of rules and regulations, and this is what you do in this situation, and X, Y, and Z. I once had an interaction with a Catholic cardinal, actually, it's Cormac Murphy O'Connor, despite the Irish name, is the Archbishop of Westminster, so basically England, and who cited something that I had just gotten through reading Augustine's writings on just war, and cited something and attributed it to Augustine, but he was clearly talking about, he was clearly almost quoting Aquinas word for it, and I'm like, oh, Augustine didn't actually say that, you're saying. And he said, oh, actually you're right, that I was pulling that from this is what Aquinas says, Augustine says, rather than directly from Augustine. So I think going back to, and I pulled it out right away because I haven't really, I'll first to admit, haven't read much Aquinas. Certainly don't see, from a historical perspective, maybe that's useful, but less from a religious perspective. So right away, I was like, that's not what Augustine said. So I would, what you say to go back to the primary sources. And most of what he wrote is available, certainly in this vein, is available in translation, a lot of it for free on the internet, and I think is some of the most valuable. I had not actually read this Luther writing on Just War or on the Life of a Christian, but on Just War specifically, actually going back to the source there, I think is very valuable.
I think we'll call that go, and everybody's good. Thank you all for attending. Thank you for the questions. Thank you for the discussion.